In a small town nestled between hills, there was a man named Thomas. He lived a quiet life, far from the noise and rush of the big city. Every day, he worked hard, doing odd jobs to make enough money to pay his rent and buy food. Life wasn't easy, but he had grown used to the struggle. He didn't ask for much, just enough to get by. But there was one thing Thomas had that many others didn't: kindness. One chilly evening in autumn, after a long day of work, Thomas was walking home from the market, carrying a bag of vegetables. As he passed the town square, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. In the corner of the square, sitting on the cold pavement, were two young girls. Their clothes were torn and worn, their faces pale from hunger, and their eyes looked lost. They couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. Thomas paused for a moment. The girls didn't look like they were from around here. He had never seen them before, but their sadness, their emptiness, struck a chord in his heart. He walked closer, his footsteps slow and careful. When he reached them, the girls didn't look up at first. They were too tired, too weak, to even acknowledge his presence. But as Thomas stood before them, one of the girls glanced up, her brown eyes wide and full of fear. "Hey there," Thomas said gently, trying not to startle them. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The girl didn't speak right away. She just looked at him, her eyes full of confusion and hesitation. The other girl, who had been sitting with her head down, slowly lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes with a look of desperation. "I'm hungry," the first girl whispered, her voice barely audible. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. He had no idea who these girls were, but seeing them in such a sorry state made him realize just how cruel the world could be. Without thinking, he reached into his bag and pulled out the loaf of bread he had just bought from the market. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He handed it to the girls, his hands trembling slightly. "Here," he said softly, "this is all I have right now. Please take it." The girls stared at the bread for a moment, as if they couldn't quite believe it. Then, with shaky hands, the first girl took the bread and tore a piece off. She brought it to her lips and took a bite, her eyes closing in relief as she chewed. The other girl did the same, her face brightening ever so slightly. Thomas watched them quietly, feeling a warmth in his chest as he saw their hunger being satisfied. Even if just for a moment, he sat down beside them on the cold pavement, not saying anything. They didn't need words right now. They just needed someone to care. The three of them sat there for a while, in complete silence. Thomas didn't mind the stillness. It wasn't often that he had the chance to connect with others, and this moment, though simple, felt important. He could feel the weight of the girls' hardship, the burden they carried. Even if they didn't speak of it, he wondered who they were, where they came from, and why they were alone. But no questions came out. All that mattered now was the warmth of the bread and the quiet companionship. When the girls finished the bread, Thomas got up slowly. The evening was growing colder, and he knew it was time to head home. He glanced down at the girls, who were now looking up at him with wide eyes, their faces still pale, but with a hint of something else: gratitude. "I'll be going now," Thomas said, "but you should stay somewhere warm. It's not safe to be out here at night." The girls didn't say anything, but they nodded, and for the first time, Thomas saw a flicker of hope in their eyes. It made his heart ache, but it also gave him a sense of peace. He didn't know if he would ever see them again, but in this moment, he had done something good, something simple, but something that mattered. He turned and began walking away, his footsteps echoing softly in the quiet square. But as he took a few steps, he stopped and looked back. The girls were still, sitting where he had left them, huddled together for warmth. But now, they weren't alone. They had someone who cared. Just before he turned the corner and out of sight, the first girl called out to him. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear now, though still soft. Thomas smiled to himself, the words filling him with a warmth that was more comforting than anything he had ever known. "You're welcome," he called back over his shoulder. Little did he know, that simple act of kindness, feeding to orphan girls a warm meal, would set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. The girls, though silent, would remember his face, his kindness, and someday they would come back. But for now, Thomas continued walking home. unaware that his life had already begun to shift in ways he could never have imagined. The sun had long set, and the stars were beginning to twinkle in the clear night sky. Thomas sat in his small, cozy apartment, a humble place filled with the warmth of simple comforts. He had finished his dinner, a bowl of soup and a piece of bread, and now he sat in front of the window, staring out at the city below. The quiet of the night was peaceful, but something inside him felt unsettled, as though the evening's events were weighing on him more than they should. He couldn't stop thinking about the girls. Their faces were etched in his mind, the look of hunger and fear that had been in their eyes. He had given them food, but in truth, it had been so little. He wondered where they were now, whether they had found a safe place to sleep for the night. A part of him wanted to go back to the square and look for them, but he knew that was probably foolish. He couldn't just leave his life behind for strangers, no matter how much they needed help. Still, there was something about those girls that tugged at his heart, a connection that he couldn't explain. He had given them a simple meal, something anyone could have done, yet it felt like they were meant to cross his path. He hadn't done anything extraordinary, but the way they had looked at him, the way they had silently accepted his kindness, it had felt important, as if he had done more than just feed them. He sighed, shaking his head as he tried to push the thoughts away. There was nothing more he could do. They were gone, and he would never see them again. Life had a way of moving on, and so must he. The weight of his quiet, solitary existence settled back in, and he tried to find peace in the routine that had always been his comfort. But as the night wore on, the unease only deepened. He tried to read, tried to distract himself with the pages of the book in his hands, but his mind kept wandering back to those girls. It was as though something inside him was telling him that their story wasn't finished, that he wasn't supposed to forget them. Hours passed, and just as he was about to turn off the light and go to bed, he heard a knock at the door. It was a soft, tentative knock, almost as though the person on the other side wasn't sure whether they should even be there. Thomas stood frozen for a moment, his heart skipping a beat. Who could it be at this hour? He wasn't expecting anyone. With cautious steps, he approached the door and slowly opened it, half expecting to find nothing at all. But there, standing before him in the dim glow of the hallway light, were the two girls. They looked exactly the same as they had that evening in the square. But now they were clean, their clothes neat, and their faces full of a strange confidence. The girl who had spoken to him first was standing in front, her eyes wide and earnest as she looked up at him. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, her voice calm but filled with an unspoken urgency. We wanted to thank you properly." Thomas blinked, unsure of what to say. He wasn't sure if he was dreaming or if he had somehow slipped into a different reality. He had only seen them once, just for a moment, and now they were standing at his door like they had come from some distant place. "There's no need for that," he replied, his voice thick with disbelief. "I only gave you a meal. It's nothing." The girl shook her head slowly, and the other one, who had been standing quietly beside her, finally spoke as well. Her voice was soft, almost as if she were unsure of what to say. "No, it was more than that," she said. "You didn't just give us food, you gave us hope." She hesitated, and Thomas could see a faint trace of emotion in her eyes. "We remember what you did. It was a kindness we didn't expect, and we couldn't forget it." Thomas was stunned. He had no idea what to make of this. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what was happening. They had come to thank him, but it wasn't just a thank you for a meal. It was something deeper, something more significant. "What do you mean?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl who had spoken before looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "We've come to repay you," she said. "We know it's not much, but we want to offer you something that will change your life." Thomas felt his heart race. He wasn't sure if he should step back, close the door, or invite them inside. There was something so strange about the whole situation, something that felt both surreal and incredibly important. "I don't understand," he said. What are you talking about?" The girl paused, looking at the other girl for reassurance before she turned back to Thomas. "We're not from here. We're not like everyone else." Thomas frowned. confused and unsure whether he should laugh or be concerned. "What do you mean?" he asked, his mind spinning with possibilities. "We're not from this world," the girl said softly, her eyes intense. "We've been sent to find someone. Someone who showed kindness when it was least expected. Someone who proved that even the smallest gesture can change everything. That someone is you." Thomas, before he could respond, the second girl stepped forward. "You've already started something, Thomas, and now we need you to help us finish it." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Thomas didn't know what to say. He felt as though he was standing at the edge of something vast, something he couldn't quite comprehend. The girls, with their cryptic words and unexpected appearance, had left him with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear: his life was about to take a turn he never could have imagined. Thomas sat down slowly, trying to process everything that was happening. The two girls, whom he had fed a simple meal just days ago, were now standing in his modest apartment, speaking of things that sounded impossible. His mind raced, trying to make sense of their words, but nothing seemed to add up. The girl who had spoken first, the one with the intense eyes, took a step forward, her presence calm but undeniable. "You don't have to be afraid," she said, her voice gentle. "We know this is a lot to take in, but we promise you we're not here to harm you. We've come to offer you something extraordinary." Thomas tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. I don't understand," he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "You say you're not from here, that you're not like anyone else. What does that mean, and why me?" "I'm just a simple man." The second girl, who had remained quiet up until now, stepped closer to her companion. She smiled softly at him, her expression both kind and knowing. "You helped us when we had nothing. You gave us what we needed most, hope, and because of that, we've chosen you. You have something special, Thomas, a connection to something much bigger than you realize." Thomas shook his head, still unsure. "I don't feel special," he said, almost to himself. "I'm just me. I've lived my whole life just getting by. I'm not someone who's important." The first girl, the one with the serious gaze, knelt down in front of him, so that their eyes met on the same level. "That's the point, Thomas," she said softly. "You're not special because of what you do or who you are. You're special because of what you believe in. You gave us something that most people would never even think to give: compassion. You didn't ask for anything in return. You didn't care who we were or where we came from. That's what makes you different." Thomas swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never thought of himself as anything extraordinary. He had always believed that helping others was just a simple thing to do, a basic human responsibility. But to these girls, it seemed like it was something much more. "Why me?" he asked again, this time with more urgency. "Why pick me out of all the people you could have chosen?" The second girl spoke this time, her voice soft and comforting. "Because you're connected to something greater than yourself. We've been searching for someone who could help us with a mission, someone who understands that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the greatest impact. You are that person." Thomas still didn't fully understand. He wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers, but he felt as though every time he spoke, it only made the situation more confusing. The girls weren't just strangers, they were something more, something beyond his comprehension. And yet, there was something inside him that told him he needed to trust them. "We've come to ask for your help," the first girl continued. "We need someone like you, someone who can see beyond what's in front of them, someone who isn't afraid to do what's right, even when they don't understand why. The future of your world depends on it." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "The future of my world? What do you mean? What's going to happen?" The second girl placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly warm. "There's a threat, Thomas, a darkness that's been waiting for the right time to strike. But we have a way to stop it if you help us." Thomas felt his heart race. He wanted to argue, to say that he was just an ordinary man with no special skills, no training. How could he help with something as big as saving the world? But then, he remembered the kindness he had shown them. What if it really did matter? What if every little thing, every small act of goodness, was part of a much larger plan? "What do I need to do?" he asked, the words leaving his mouth before he could think them through. The girls exchanged a look, as though they had been waiting for this moment. "We need you to come with us," the first girl said. "We can't do this alone. We need someone who believes in hope, in the power of kindness. You're the one we've been waiting for." For the first time in a long while, Thomas felt a strange sense of purpose stir inside him. It was overwhelming, like something deep within him had been awakened. The life he had known, the small, quiet existence he had lived, suddenly felt insignificant compared to what was being asked of him. But in that same moment, he realized that this was his chance to do something more to make a real difference. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he stood up. "I don't know what this means," he said quietly, "but I'll help. I don't know how, but I'll do whatever it takes." The two girls smiled, their faces glowing with gratitude. "We knew you would," the second girl said softly. "You've already started the journey, Thomas. Now we just need you to trust us." As the words left her lips, the air around them seemed to change. The room felt different, charged with an energy that Thomas couldn't quite understand, but could feel in every fiber of his being. He had no idea what was coming next, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, something that mattered. The girls led him to the door, and without another word, they stepped outside into the night. Thomas followed, his heart pounding in his chest. As they walked together through the quiet streets, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of world he was about to step into. But one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. The night was unusually still, the city's usual hum of noise and life muted under the weight of Thomas's thoughts. His heart beat faster with every step he took, though he wasn't sure whether it was fear or excitement that had him on edge. He followed the two girls, still uncertain of what he had gotten himself into. The streets were empty, and the air was crisp with the coolness of early winter. As they walked, the world around them seemed to disappear, as if they were in a place far removed from the ordinary. Every corner, every shadow, every street lamp felt different now. The girls, who had seemed so small and vulnerable just days ago, now held an aura of calm certainty. There was no hesitation in their movements, no doubt in their eyes. It was as if they were part of something vast, something ancient, and they were waiting for him to understand it, too. "We're almost there," the first girl said, her voice breaking the silence that had settled between them. She glanced over her shoulder at Thomas, her eyes steady and sure. "You'll see it soon. Just trust us." Thomas didn't respond right away. He was still trying to process the gravity of everything she had said. The more they spoke, the more it seemed like the world he knew was just a tiny, insignificant part of something much, much larger. They had come to him because of his kindness, because of a simple meal he had shared with two hungry girls, and now he was being asked to join them in a mission that he could hardly comprehend. What could he possibly have to offer? But then the second girl, the one who had been quieter, looked up at him. Her face was soft, almost sad, and in that moment, Thomas felt a deep sense of empathy for her. "You're not alone in this, Thomas," she said, her voice gentle. "We've been waiting for someone like you, someone with a heart full of hope. You're the key to something much bigger than you could imagine. Don't doubt that." Her words lingered in the air, settling deep in his chest. He felt the weight of them, the sincerity in her voice, and for the first time since they had arrived at his door, he began to understand why he was here. It wasn't just about helping the girls. It wasn't even about the kindness he had shown. It was about something greater, something that could change everything. They turned a corner, and Thomas felt a strange sense of anticipation rise within him. The streets were different now. The buildings felt taller, the shadows deeper, and the light from the street lamps dimmer. It was as though they had crossed into a new world, one that was unfamiliar and yet oddly comforting. The girls didn't stop, their pace quickening as they walked toward a part of the city Thomas had never seen before. He had lived here his whole life, but this part of town felt different, older, quieter, almost as though it had been forgotten by time. There were no cars, no people, just an eerie silence that seemed to echo with the weight of history. As they approached a large, abandoned warehouse at the edge of the city, Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. The building loomed over them, like a forgotten giant, its windows boarded up and its once grand doors rotting with age. But it wasn't the building that caught his attention. It was what stood in front of it. The air shimmered, and in the space between the warehouse and the street, something began to materialize. It was as though the world itself was folding, rearranging, revealing a hidden reality. At first, it was just a ripple like a mirage in the desert, but then it grew, solidifying into something more tangible. Before him, a massive ship appeared. Out of thin air, a sleek, gleaming craft unlike anything Thomas had ever seen. It was enormous, with smooth, metallic curves and glowing lights that seemed to pulse with life. The ship hovered silently, its engines humming with a quiet power. It was a thing of beauty, but also of mystery, and in that moment, Thomas realized that everything he had known was about to change forever. The girls stopped in front of the ship. Turning to face him, the first girl smiled, her expression filled with quiet pride. "This is where it begins, Thomas," she said softly. "This is what we've been waiting for." Thomas stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had never imagined something like this. It was beyond anything his mind could comprehend. A spaceship materializing out of thin air. It felt like a dream or maybe a nightmare. He wasn't sure anymore. How is this even possible? He whispered, his voice trembling. The second girl stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The world you know is only a small part of the universe. There are other worlds, other civilizations, and they are all waiting for humanity to step up. We need you, Thomas. This ship will take you to where you can make a difference." Thomas stared at her hand, at the ship behind her, and then back at the girls. His mind was racing, but a part of him, the part that had always hoped for something more, was ready to take the leap. He had always felt like there was more to life than what he could see, and now, standing before the ship, it seemed like the universe was finally showing him the way. He reached out, his hand shaking slightly as he touched hers. "I don't know what I'm getting into," he said quietly, "but I'll follow you. I don't know where this will lead, but I'm ready." The first girl nodded, a look of satisfaction crossing her face. "You're already part of it, Thomas. There's no turning back now." As the doors of the spaceship opened, Thomas took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air inside was cool and clean, and the interior was far more advanced than anything he could have imagined. The walls were sleek and smooth, illuminated by soft, glowing lights. The technology seemed otherworldly, and yet there was something familiar about it, a sense of home, as if he had always belonged here, waiting for this moment. The doors closed behind him, and the ship began to hum, lifting off the ground with a soft whoosh. Through the windows, Thomas looked down at the city he had known all his life, now growing smaller as they ascended into the night sky. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning, and whatever came next, he was ready for it. As the spaceship soared higher into the sky, Thomas couldn't help but feel both exhilarated and terrified at the same time. The ground beneath them had disappeared, and now they were rising above the city, above everything he had ever known. The world he had lived in for so long seemed so small, so insignificant from the view he had now. But his thoughts weren't focused on the vastness of the world or the sky. They were on the two girls who had brought him here. The first girl, the one with the deep, steady gaze, sat across from him, her eyes fixed on some distant point as if she could see beyond the stars themselves. The second girl, the quieter one, stood by the ship's window, her hands pressed against the cool glass, staring down at the shrinking earth below. Neither of them seemed afraid. They were calm, confident even. But Thomas, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was slipping through his fingers, that the gravity of what was happening was more than he could bear. "So what happens now?" Thomas asked, his voice breaking the silence that had hung between them since they boarded the ship. He glanced around, taking in the strange, futuristic interior. The ship was sleek and clean, with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse gently with every movement, like the very heart of the vessel was alive. The first girl, who had been silent for most of the journey, finally turned her gaze toward him. Her eyes were deep, almost impossibly so, and Thomas could see something in them, a wisdom that made him feel small. as though he was just a tiny part of something much larger. She spoke with the same quiet authority that had drawn him in from the start. "You are part of something now, Thomas. Something important," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "The kindness you showed us was no accident. It was the catalyst for what's coming next." Thomas furrowed his brow, not fully understanding what she meant. He had always tried to do the right thing, to help others when he could, but he had never thought it would lead him to this moment, to a spaceship in the sky, bound for the unknown. "What are we really doing here?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You've said it's important, but I don't understand how feeding to girls a meal could mean anything to whatever this is." The girl stood and walked toward him, her movements fluid and graceful, almost as though she were moving in slow motion. "It's not just about the meal, Thomas. It's about who you are. You didn't just give us food, you gave us a part of yourself, and that was something we've been searching for, something that's been missing for a long time." The quiet girl, still standing by the window, spoke for the first time in what felt like hours. Her voice was soft, almost like a murmur, but it carried a weight that made Thomas turn his head toward her. "You see, Thomas," she began, "we're not just here to thank you for your kindness. We're here because we need your help. There's a war coming, a war that will change everything. And your actions, your heart are the key to stopping it." The words hit Thomas like a blow to the chest. A war that would change everything. He hadn't signed up for this. He had barely even wrapped his mind around the idea of being in space, let alone being a part of something as huge as a galactic war. "A war?" Thomas repeated, his voice shaky. "But I'm just a guy who gave to hungry girls a meal. What could I possibly do in a war? I don't even know how to fight. I don't have any special powers. I don't even know what's going on." The girl with the steady gaze approached him again, her expression softening for the first time. "That's the thing, Thomas," she said. "You don't need to be a soldier. You don't need powers or strength. What you have, what you gave to us, is something far more powerful: compassion, the ability to see the humanity in others, to act out of kindness without expecting anything in return. That's what the universe needs right now." Thomas stared at her, his mind spinning with the implications of what she was saying. Was it really possible? Could the simple act of kindness, something he had always taken for granted, be the key to stopping a war that could destroy everything? It seemed impossible, like something out of a dream. But as he looked at the girls, their faces filled with conviction and purpose, he began to realize that this wasn't a dream. This was real, and somehow he was at the center of it all. "We've been watching for years, Thomas," the second girl continued. "We're part of an alliance that spans across the stars. But there's a dark force, an ancient enemy that has been growing stronger. They've been waiting for humanity to be ready, waiting for someone who can guide you to the right path, someone who understands that the most powerful weapon in the universe is love. You're that person." The words echoed in his mind, and for the first time, Thomas felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just an ordinary man anymore. He had a purpose. He wasn't sure what that purpose was yet, or how he was supposed to stop this war, but he knew one thing: he couldn't turn back now. As the ship continued its journey through the stars, Thomas felt a sense of peace wash over him, though it was mixed with a deep, unshakable fear. He had been pulled into something far greater than he could ever have imagined, but now he was part of it. He didn't know how it would end, or if he would even survive it, but for the first time in his life, he knew he had made a difference. The ship hummed softly round him, the stars outside sparkling like a sea of diamonds. It was beautiful, otherworldly, and yet Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something dark and powerful, waiting just beyond the horizon, and he would need to be ready when it did. The future of the universe rested on his shoulders, and though the weight was immense, he finally understood that he wasn't alone. He had the girls by his side, and with them, he had something far stronger than fear, hope. The war was coming, but together they could face it. Together they could save everything. Chat said. The ship continued to glide through the vastness of space, its engines humming in a smooth, almost hypnotic rhythm. The stars outside seemed like endless diamonds, scattered across the black velvet of the universe, their cold light shimmering in the distance. But for Thomas, The beauty of it all was overshadowed by the swirling storm inside him. His thoughts raced as he tried to make sense of everything that had happened. How a simple act of kindness had led him to this point, and now how his life was intertwined with a galactic struggle that seemed beyond anything he had ever imagined. The two girls, who had once seemed so vulnerable, were no longer the innocent children he had met. They had transformed into something more: guides, leaders, bearers of an urgent mission. But what role did he play in all of this? What part did a man like him, who had never left his small town, who had always kept to himself, have to offer? In a war that spanned the stars, they had told him he was the key, but he didn't feel like one. He wasn't special, he wasn't a fighter, and he certainly didn't understand the ways of the universe. The more they spoke of this war, the more lost he felt. The first girl, the one who had been so calm from the beginning, seemed to sense his unease. She stood by the ship's control panel, watching him with a look that was almost knowing. "Do you trust us, Thomas?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. The question wasn't an accusation, but it felt like a challenge one. He wasn't sure how to answer. He hesitated for a moment, considering her words. He had trusted them so far, hadn't he? He had taken a leap into the unknown, walked onto a spaceship, and flown into space all because they had asked him to. But trusting them didn't mean he understood what was happening. It didn't mean he was ready for what was to come. I don't know if I trust myself," Thomas admitted, his voice quieter than he intended. He rubbed his hands together nervously, the uncertainty gnawing at him. "This all feels too big. I'm just a guy who helped two girls. I didn't ask for this. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." The first girl turned to him, her gaze soft but firm. She didn't seem angry or frustrated, just understanding. "That's exactly why we need you. You're not doing this for glory or power. You're doing it because you're capable of seeing things that others can't. You've already shown us what matters. Now we need you to understand that the universe is waiting for humanity to step into the light." Thomas looked at her, his mind struggling to piece together the fragments of what she was saying. The universe, humanity. He was a small-town man. What did the universe care about him? He had no grand destiny. He wasn't a hero. The second girl, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke up. She stepped closer to him, her voice gentle but filled with conviction. "We're not asking you to fight in a traditional sense. There's no battlefield for you to stand on. You don't need weapons or armor. What we need is something far more powerful." Thomas furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" The second girl smiled faintly, her eyes glinting with a quiet strength. "We need you to lead, to show humanity what it means to stand together, to fight with compassion and understanding instead of hatred and fear. The enemy we face isn't one that can be defeated with guns or bombs. It's a force that thrives on division, on chaos. We need someone who can unite the people of Earth, who can remind them of what they're capable of when they stand together." Thomas shook his head, unable to fully grasp the weight of her words. "But I'm not a leader. I'm just a guy who's always tried to do what's right. I'm not equipped for something like this. I don't even know where to start." The first girl walked toward him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "That's why you're perfect. You don't have all the answers. You don't need to. What matters is that you care. You see beyond the surface. You understand that kindness and unity are powerful tools. That's the strength we need." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had always thought of himself as just one small, insignificant person. But now, standing in the midst of something so much bigger than himself, he felt the weight of their trust in him. They were asking him to do something that seemed impossible. And yet, in his heart, he felt a stirring, a quiet pull, like the faintest whisper telling him that maybe, just maybe, he could do it. The second girl continued, her tone more serious now. "The enemy we're fighting is called the divide. It's not just a force of darkness, it's a virus that spreads through fear, greed, and hatred. It infiltrates minds, causing division, mistrust, and ultimately, destruction. The more fractured the people are, the stronger it becomes. But there's a way to stop it. The way to defeat the divide isn't through violence, it's through unity, through compassion." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. "But how do I do that? How do I unite people? It feels like the world is already falling apart." The First girl's eyes softened, and she stepped back slightly, her gaze thoughtful. That's why you were chosen, Thomas. You have the ability to see beyond the fear. You have the heart to bring people together. You don't need to do it alone. You'll have help, but it's up to you to remind the people of Earth who they are and what they can accomplish when they work together. The ship's engines hummed louder now, as if responding to her words. Its sleek form cutting through the vast emptiness of space. Thomas could feel his pulse quicken, his mind racing. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know how he would do what they were asking him to do. But deep down, something inside him clicked. He wasn't alone. He had these two girls, the ones who had trusted him, and he had the heart to fight for what was right. Even if it didn't seem like much, the universe might be a vast, mysterious place, but for the first time, he felt like he was part of something that mattered, and maybe, just maybe, he was ready to lead. The stars outside the window seemed to stretch endlessly, each one a tiny glimmer in the boundless expanse of space. Thomas stood at the observation window, his hands resting on the cool glass, gazing out at the uncharted galaxies beyond. The ship had entered a sector of space he had never seen, an untouched part of the universe that felt both exhilarating and unsettling. Everything about this journey was new, unfamiliar, and yet, in some strange way, it felt like he was meant to be here. The girls, the ones who had once seemed so fragile and uncertain, now exuded an almost otherworldly confidence. They had explained the mission to him in fragments, piecing together the puzzle of what was to come. But still, so much of it was shrouded in mystery. The divide, the dark force they were fighting, remained an elusive and terrifying concept. And while Thomas now understood the gravity of the situation, the full weight of what he was supposed to do still hadn't fully settled within him. He couldn't help but think back to that night, the one where everything changed. The night he had fed to hungry girls a meal. It seemed so trivial now, a simple act of kindness. And yet, it had been the spark that ignited this incredible journey. Could that moment really have set all of this into motion? Could a single act of compassion truly be enough to change the course of the future? The first girl, the one who had always been the most vocal about the mission, approached him now. Her steps were deliberate, calm. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him. Looking out at the stars, Thomas could feel the weight of her presence, the depth of her wisdom and purpose. "You're wondering if you're really meant for this, aren't you?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper in the stillness of the ship. Thomas nodded, not looking at her. "Yeah, I keep asking myself how one small act could lead to this. This responsibility, this war. I'm not sure I'm the right person for it." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she seemed to contemplate his words, her gaze fixed on the swirling galaxies outside. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice gentle but filled with conviction. "You are meant for this, Thomas, not because of your strength or your abilities, but because of your heart. You were chosen because of the very qualities that make you human: the compassion, the empathy, the willingness to put others before yourself. That's what we need. That's what humanity needs. But I don't have the answers," he said, turning to face her. "I'm just a guy who happened to help two girls. What if I fail? What if I can't unite people? What if I can't stop this war?" Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something softer in her gaze, a kind of understanding that made him feel less alone. "Failure isn't something to fear," she said softly. "It's a part of growth. Every leader, every hero has faced doubt, but what matters is that you keep moving forward, even when you don't have all the answers. The universe isn't asking for perfection, Thomas. It's asking for someone who will stand up, who will fight for what's right, even when it seems impossible." He thought about her words, about the enormity of the task ahead. The divide was a force unlike anything humanity had faced before. It wasn't just a physical enemy, it was a force that thrived on division, on mistrust, on fear, and the only way to defeat it was through unity, through compassion, through the very qualities Thomas had spent his life nurturing, without ever realizing their true power. It felt like a heavy burden, but also a profound responsibility. He wasn't just fighting for himself or for the girls. He was fighting for everyone, for the future of humanity. The weight of that responsibility made his chest tighten, but at the same time, it gave him a sense of purpose he had never felt before. "You're not alone, Thomas," the second girl said, stepping forward. Her voice was soft but firm. "We're with you. The universe is with you, and together, we'll find a way to stop the divide." He looked at her, and then at the first girl, who was now smiling gently. For the first time, Thomas felt a flicker of hope, a spark that he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now. He had been given a chance to make a difference, not because he was some extraordinary figure, but because of his willingness to believe in something greater than himself. "All right," he said, his voice steadying as he looked out at the stars once more. "Let's do this. Let's fight for humanity. Let's fight for the future." The girls nodded in unison, their expressions resolute. The ship continued to hum softly round them, its engines propelling them forward through the stars. But now, for the first time since he boarded the ship, Thomas felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't just a passenger on this journey. He was part of something far bigger than himself. As the stars outside glimmered with the promise of unknown worlds, Thomas felt a surge of determination. The divide was coming, the war would be brutal, and the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He had found his purpose, and with the girls by his side, with the trust of the universe in his hands, he would fight, he would stand up, and he would lead humanity into the future no matter the cost. In the distance, the darkness of space stretched out waiting, but so did the light, and with it, the hope that one small act of kindness could indeed change the world.